All right. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for sticking around. I can't promise that I'm going to outdo the First Lady, but I can promise that after this we will be going to a cocktail hour. My name is Jeremy. I am a senior reporter at Higher Ed Dive. We're a business publication here in DC. We cover everything from ed tech to admissions to state and federal ed policy. And this is my official plug for you all to please sign up for our daily newsletter. I'm very excited for our panel today. We have Scott Pulsipher.
No doctor.
He is president of Western Governors University. We have Dr. Cindy Lindquist, and I apologize for this pronunciation, but it is president of Candeska Cikana College, close, in North Dakota, tribal institution. We have Evelyn Gonzalez, Director of Clinical Workforce Development for the Florida Memorial Healthcare System, and Maria Flynn, President and Chief Executive of Jobs for the Future. Thank you all for joining us. I am particularly excited to have this conversation because we are talking about a rapidly changing world. You know, the First Lady spoke this morning about, no longer needing a four-year degree necessarily. We have seen advancements, but at the same time, there's a lot of buzzwords flying around. Stackable credentials, short-term pathways, and it's very easy to get caught up in sort of the policy landscape, the policy echo chamber. I'm excited to have this conversation because you all work at the ground level. You all work with the students. You all see the changes here. So I want to hop in and pose a question to our college presidents. What do your learners look like, and how do you think that differs from 40 years ago?
You want to take that first, Cindy? You want? Okay. First of all, just by way of quick background, Western Governors University was founded by governors of 19 Western states just over 25 years ago. So we're one of the youngest institutions in the U.S., but on a full-time enrollment basis, we're actually the largest university now in the country and graduate nearly 50,000 a year. We were specifically designed to serve those that would be considered non-traditional learners. The cultural psyche that we have in the United States is that individuals go to college after they graduate from high school. They're supposed to stay there for 4 years because we keep referring to a bachelor's as a four-year degree, but no one completes it in 4 years. They complete it in 5 years on average. And so I think we actually recognize that the governors in particular at the founding of it recognized that there was a huge swath of our citizens and our residents in those respective states that were working, that had many demands on their time that did not allow them to go to a campus at a set time and sit in a classroom. They needed education that's more directly relevant to the next opportunity that they were pursuing in their lives. They tended to be older, so they were over the age of 24 on average, such that our average learner is about the age of 32 now. But they also they had some college but no degree. That number now in the U.S. is 40 million adults have some college but no credential or no degree. That is the growing percentage of the population. If you look at just the 18.5 million or so enrolled in the U.S. today, nearly 45% now are over the age of 24. And there's not enough to be said about the demographic cliff that also many institutions are looking at. But just one other thing I'd reiterate that higher learning advocates actually identified that we also have misperceptions about college-going individuals, that we think they all live on a campus, they're kind of in that micro-city bubble, et cetera. It's not true. Only 13% of freshmen actually live on a campus. Over half, nearly 60%, are actually working full or part-time. 25% of them have a child. It's a very different population than we see in Hollywood, or that we kind of have the impression on Saturday game day and those that are filling the stands. So that's who are increasingly part of our enrollment population, that we're trying to figure out how to better serve them with post-secondary education that's relevant to where they are and what they want to pursue.
How mitake dapi. Hey shunka wakama chakbiwe imaki api. Hey mini wakan oyate edwati damakota. Hello, my friends. My Dakota name is Star Horse Woman. I'm a member of the Spirit Lake Dakota tribe. I am Dakota. My English name is Cynthia Lindquist. I am president of Candeska Cikana Community College. Candeska Cikana is going to celebrate its 50th anniversary next year. My college is one of 35 tribal colleges and universities in this country. We have about 90 campus sites in 16 states. We estimate we cover about 80% of Indian country. We serve about 160,000 students. on a national level, and about 15% of those students are non-native. Anyone is welcome to attend our institutions, and we welcome that. We are accredited just like mainstream. We are public nonprofit. There's a few variations. Most of us are reservation-based. So I'm a little out of my element because I'm coming from Spirit Lake, Fort Totten, North Dakota, to Washington, D.C., and then sit among this illustrious panel. But I'm really grateful that the Reagan Institute saw to include tribal colleges and a tribal college president, because we've long been invisible, we've long not been heard, continue to be misunderstood. A typical tribal college student is a 30-year-old single mother who works full-time and generally has 2 or 3 children. And that is my student. And so it hasn't really changed much in my 50 years that my college has been serving Spirit Lake Dakota community. But we are seeing a change, both male, female, the number of students. Some of us are really accelerating relative to enrollment, which is unusual given coming off a pandemic supposedly and all that. But we do really good work. And that good work at the tribal college level is really rooted in what I need to make sure you all understand is that Native people have a very different relationship with this country. It's a political relationship. And so we emphasize tribal college. And what does that mean? And there are some rules that go along with that. So my students, I have to have documentation of their certificate of Indian blood in my records, but an MSI or a Native serving institution does not have that same requirement. They get to self-identify in that. So there's some nuances relative to the students we serve. But I also believe, because I live in rural North Dakota, and I have a great partnership with the state North Dakota University system, particularly Lake Region State College, which is just 14 miles away from our reservation, partnering, collaborating. And I truly think the supposed definition, non-traditional student, college students have always been different. You know, we just haven't looked at it in that way. We haven't acknowledged it publicly in that form or fashion. And I think there is so much opportunity right now. And that's why I'm just happy to be here today to talk about it. How are we doing things differently? And what is that all about? And obviously this panel is about workforce and higher education, so we'll get to that. But I think our students are similar in many, many ways. They want what's best for themselves, but it's really for their family, for their extended family, for their community. How do we help our people to succeed in that vein?
Thank you, and I do want to give you a special shout out because so much ink is spilled on the Harvards, the Stanfords of the world, but it is very important that we keep highlighting non-traditional students, whatever that looks like, elevating them. So, Evelyn, why don't you talk a little bit about how employers can bridge a gap between, again, this sect of students that may have not gotten a lot of attention in the past, but now eyes are turning.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having an employer here because I've been to a number of education summits, even workforce development conferences, and the number of us employers in that room is minute, and it needs to change because, you know, all of you in education, in my eyes, you produce a product, but we are the consumer, right? So we need to work very closely together. I will talk about pre-pandemic versus where we've had to change because of the pandemic, particularly in healthcare, but honestly in all industries. So before the pandemic, we enjoyed about 10,000 applicants a month at Memorial Healthcare System in Broward County, which is, you know, we're very comfortable. We were very happy and that we didn't have to look for people. And then, of course, you know, things changed. But before that, one of the things that we have put into place was we had schools paying us to take their students. And when I got there, I'm like, this is insane. Why would we do that? On the contrary, so I stopped that and I said, you know what? I think every department in this healthcare organization, because we are now about 16,000 employees strong, we need to be very open to students. So what we ended up doing is what was the first thing is we got rid of that. Second thing is we said within ourselves, we said, look, there's a lot of for-profit, unfortunately, in the state of Florida, predatory schools that were getting a lot of our employees and saying, hey, we're gonna put you into nursing school, $70,000, and no one talked about an NCLEX pass rate of 30%. So you imagine a nursing assistant racking up all that debt and then not being able to pass the board to become a nurse. That's devastating. So at Memorial, we said we're only going to affiliate with schools that are nationally accredited and it's verifiable. I'm going to need to see the curriculum, and also I'm going to need to see what your board pass rates are if it's applicable. So that's some of the changes that we first made. Obviously, I also encouraged every department, like I said, to take students because that is your future colleagues. So actually, we changed the name of students in our organization to future colleagues. We have to start thinking of our students as that way. After that, after the pandemic, obviously when we had this mass exodus due to either fear of what was happening, because at Memorial, we had at one point over 850 COVID positive patients. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know. People think, oh my God, we had no idea what we were doing. We were just watching people die for a long time. So we had people leave, and then on top of that, we had a lot of our staff say, hey, I can go across the country and make 3 times the amount of money that we're making today. And you know what? I said, go for it. Why not? Just remember that we're here for you when this is all over. Because, like everything, things change. So what we did during that time of crisis, we said, all right, we need to take a look at ourselves as far as our employees. Because we did have that mentality from our management that was, I have a great employee. Why would I want to, help them grow into another position at Memorial? I'm like, well, wait a minute. Either you help them grow and stay within the organization, or we're going to lose them to the competition, right? So that's when we started to do a lot of work with our local schools, particularly our, community college, and we said, all right, let's go ahead and let's start giving paths to our employees, particularly at the entry level. And we said, all right, do you want to go into clinical or do you want to go non-clinical? What people don't understand is, as an employer of 16,000 people, it's not what you see on TV. It's not just doctors and nurses. I have a huge IT team. I have a huge law team, food and nutrition. It goes on and on. People don't think about that. So when we took all of our employees and we said, hey, how about, do you want to go into clinical? Do you want to go into non-clinical? Here's some pathways for you. And, the first we were like, no one's going to take us up on this. And you were amazed at the number of applicants that we had internally. So we said, all right, fine, we'll pay for the whole thing, and we'll make sure that you have a job afterwards, because that was the other thing, right? We were doing a lot of tuition assistance, put people through school, and then after they got that degree, well, you don't have experience. That is crazy. I mean, I had people calling me like, you paid for my school. How could you not give me, a job in this? And I'm like, you're absolutely right. We need to change that. So that's some of the work that we started to change. On top of that, we also, Broward County does as a whole. We have a low, everybody talks about low, all right, vacancy rate for jobs. Well, that's not the case in all zip codes in Broward County. So when we started looking at certain zip codes and it was 15% unemployment, well, why are we not doing something there? And that's when we started to move our resources. We started to move our resources and going to those communities with our partners and say, listen, I'm not going to talk to you about a 4-year degree or even a 2-year degree, right? Because that's not where you might not be there yet. But I'm going to talk to you about a few weeks to get a certification. I'm going to pay for it. And then if you're successful, I'm going to give you a job. So that's what we're moving towards. And it's none of those can be more than 6 months. That's what, my requirement was. It's like you cannot have any of these be more than 6 months because I have to get people in. Then within 90 days, I'll give you the ability to use my tuition assistance program to continue if you want to. That's what we have to do. We also have to partner with the schools with our money, right? So last year, I gave my local college $1.5 million because, again, we want to send our employees to grow there. We also want to help them with this, these zip codes that I'm talking about, the underserved, underemployed. But not just to that college. We also gave $1.3 million to a number of schools in our county, in our area, because our governor put together this line fund that said, if you, as an employer, as a healthcare employer, give dollars towards faculty or towards scholarships for nursing, then we will match dollar for dollar, And people have said to me, well, how did you get the money? How do you afford it? Because we can't afford not to. We can't afford not to. We are, using agency. That's very expensive. We're using, we're having a massive problem with our employees that are just exhausted. They're still dealing with the aftermath of seeing people die. And again, when you have people calling out because they're just with a short staff, you can't afford not to invest.
Evelyn, you mentioned, not wanting to affiliate with institutions that would saddle students with a large amount of debt, and of course that is a major conversation right now. It's sort of what I call a hyper-focus on a return on investment, right? And Scott, I know you have thoughts on this, but Maria, could you tell us a little bit what is driving this shift? Why are the public policymakers so concerned with, making sure that college is the bang for the buck?
I think in large part policymakers are reacting to what their constituents are saying, right? I think more and more young people, parents across the board are questioning, what am I paying for and what am I going to get from this? If you look at the change from what my parents paid for my tuition at a private four-year liberal arts college, I graduated in 1991, and what I'm paying for my daughter now, if you adjust the dollars, it's 3 times the cost, for a pretty similar type of college education. So the costs are climbing. The debt levels have been talked a lot about today. And I think the issue is the policymakers haven't come up with the best way to address that ROI question yet. I wasn't in the room when James was talking, but the gainful employment proposed rules are out. I hear it's about 1,000 pages long, so I haven't read it all. But I think we have to think about those would apply to for-profit providers, and we mentioned the proprietary schools and folks who have not a great history of outcomes. And it would apply to workforce programs within community colleges, right? But it kind of raises the question, well, what about all the other institutions, right? When I was helping my daughter look at schools, I pulled out the ROI information that Georgetown has put out, and the other night we looked at where she was applying, and she was like, Mom, I don't care. What is this? What am I looking at? But we have to kind of really think about what is the role of higher education? How do we make the information that we do have actionable? How can we really help families make decisions based on this information? What context are we putting in? How do we access it in something that's not just like a dry spreadsheet on a university website? And how do we help them make decisions, good decisions, that are based on that information? So I think that there's a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of which we're trying to work on at JFF around how do you address the quality of degrees as well as short-term credentials? We just launched a partnership with Burning Glass Institute that's designed to really dig into that, particularly on the short-term credential side. We're looking at things like innovative finance. So I think the conversation around student debt is an important one, but how can we also be looking at other innovative tools, whether that's income share agreements or other methods that are out there that can help keep debt low and really be pushing that focus on return on investment.
And you're absolutely right that I think lawmakers have really latched onto this measure, right? The Biden administration is also in the process of creating a list of low-value colleges that sort of is going to be almost a shaming tactic. But I'd be interested, is this the wrong measure to look at? Is the hyper-focus on this incorrect? So, Scott, you do have thoughts on this?
It's not, I wouldn't say it's incorrect. It's not the only measure that we should be looking at, but if any of you have looked at my background, you realize my entire cumulative experience in higher education is the 7 years I've been at WGU. I was in the industry or in private sector before that. And I think in my kind of, review of the history of higher ed in the U.S. is I think we actually fundamentally started with the simple premise that it was the greatest catalyst for someone to change their life for the better, for us to actually skill and talent, up talent, if you will, the individuals that are going to be contributing to the economy. Like, that was the fundamental presumption. And whether you go back to the Land Grant, Immoral Act of 1862 or the GI Bill or the HEA, it doesn't matter. I think the fundamental premise was for the interest of the public and our economy that you had to underwrite it in a way that made it highly accessible, highly relevant to the future work, that it made it traversable by all individuals into it, and that would actually be the case. I personally don't think that they imagined that somehow this emerging value proposition would include this coming-of-age experience of an 18-year-old. And yet, that's what we culturally have latched onto. And it's sad because if you now look at the total budget and the costs that actually go to providing that value proposition versus what's actual instructional budgets are now less than 30% of traditional public flagship or public institutions. So it makes you wonder, what the heck are we spending all the money on? And it's not education. It's actually something else. And it may be research, but I would certainly ask all of you in the audience, do we need 4,000 research institutions? Do we need, the professors of all those institutions clamoring to be published for the research that they're driving, that they may be rewarded with tenure? Probably not. We probably need, on balance, more focus on, are we doing a really good job of teaching the future individuals into the economy? Are we demonstrating that we can deliver that at a very reasonable cost such that it makes it highly affordable? Are we making sure it's relevant to the work so that those who are coming out of it actually are attaining opportunity? Fundamentally, then, I think you'll deliver on the value proposition that already 3/4 of those going to college, regardless of age, by the way, are telling us, which is, I'm going there so I can get a better job. And yet somehow we want to keep telling them, no, you're coming here because you want to be a better citizen. And I also challenge you with this simple thing. Have you ever met an engaged citizen that also didn't have a great job and was financially reliant, was self-determined in their life and everything else like that? They go hand in hand, and somehow we've lost that kind of core value proposition that says this is actually a path to opportunity. So I think it has to increase, the attention on it has to increase because I think we've become imbalanced over the last 50 years. One last point I'll simply make on this is that if we think it's supposed to be an engine of economic and social mobility, then we wouldn't have what's happened over the last 50 years, which is if you came from the top income quartile, your likelihood of completing a degree went from 40% to 70%. But if you came from the bottom income quartile, it went from a measly 6% to a measly 13%. And so it's not working as a great equalizer, and I think we certainly should demand of our institutions and the programs they design and everything else that they do. And so that will be okay.
Well, institutions are working, I think, to develop new pathways, but I think there's a lot of confusion around it too. And not just about, particular credentials, but paying for college too. There are models where students pay back a portion of their income over time instead of paying tuition up front. So I want to turn back to Maria. Could you talk a little bit about maybe some misconceptions that the public has with, again, some of these alternative pathways or, again, models for paying for school?
Yeah, so I think my biggest concern that I have is that there's a lack of transparency around those pathways. So I'm a big believer that multiple pathways is what we need and what we need to move towards, and we need to kind of start changing the narrative more in that direction. We did a study recently with American Student Assistance that showed it's an idea that has really strong bipartisan support, and I think we've heard that echoed in many ways today. We also did a study with them that we called Degrees of Risk, where we surveyed both Gen Zers and employers and asked them, are you interested in these various kind of like non-four-year degree pathways? What do you think about them? The short answer was that the vast majority of both groups were very interested. This was everything from a registered apprenticeship to a boot camp to other kind of like industry-driven credentials. But we called it degree of risk because even though the interest was there, the young people were like kind of afraid to go in that direction because it's like, well, I'm interested in this, but how do I know someone's going to hire me? Employers also interested, particularly at like the C-suite level, but when you get down to like the hiring managers, that's when the nervousness came in again. So how can we start really demystifying this? How can we start, bringing that information about what's possible down into middle schools and high schools and start having that conversation and not just focus everything around a four-year degree? Like going back to like my daughter's experience, their first college counseling session with her class, the initial question was, do you want to go to a college or a university? It's like, that was the baseline, right, for the conversation they were having, like, let alone any kind of other option they could be looking at. And I think we have to do two things. Like, one is continue to help the traditional higher ed institutions, kind of embrace these kinds of changes. How can they build these type of, shorter interventions? How can they partner with folks in new ways to bring new interventions like into their institutions? But we also need to keep looking and working at, the disruptors, the innovators who are building solutions outside of these traditional systems. And how can we be sure that equitable outcomes can be at the center of all these transformation efforts? So I think it's a critical conversation. I think, I started at the U.S. Department of Labor in 1991, and it's like we've been having this conversation like for a couple decades, right? Like, how do we change the narrative? It's been 40 years since Nation at Risk. It's been, 30 years since the Scans Commission. It's probably been 20 years since the Spellings Commission, right? And even though like we've seen these things happen across parties, across administrations, a lot of these themes like have stayed the same. And I think, we're coming to a crisis point when we look at student debt, when we look at the cost of higher ed, that some of these things are going to have to move from conversation to action.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're right that the policy environment has not kept up. I hear that from a lot of college leaders. So, Cynthia, I wonder if you can
interject
one
thing
absolutely.
really quickly.
Please.
I just want to maybe emphasize something that I at least would argue that we should all be careful of. That alternative pathways or micro-credentials or whatever you want to call them are not in lieu of a degree. I just want to emphasize that I think where we have to change our mindset is away from a one and done model of post-secondary education to a continual model of post-secondary education, because there is value proposition in both. We are a degree provider, but we will also be an alternative credential provider because we actually recognize that many individuals actually need access to that first job. But that does not mean that they don't need a degree. We just have to stop calling it a four-year degree because that is the one and done thinking around a degree, such that they may scaffold to a degree. There's also ample evidence already developing now that says those credentials that are actually stackable into subsequent credentials, they have dramatically higher value as well as higher persistence rate among the individuals who know that has transferable credit. The other thing I would just simply say, there are many who hold degrees right now who need a credential to actually move from where they are to the next opportunity they have to move to. And so I wouldn't call those ones say, oh, you got to go back and get a master's now or something else. But you certainly need credentials that will traject you, if you will, or at least lend you an opportunity to move up. And so we should stop thinking that this is an alternative. This is actually credentials and degrees. Like that, those both matter a lot.
And the policy environment, again, hasn't kept up with the micro-credentials either. No. I mean, you have bipartisan support around short-term Pell, for instance, but we haven't seen that path. So I want to know what the ground level looks like when you don't have all these policy tools that keep up.
Yeah, or when they're detrimental to
Yeah,
what you're trying
absolutely.
to do.
I
in the real
include funding
world.
and policy as well.
Well, a couple of things. Return on investment is, you generally go to economics. Okay, fine, yeah, money, measures.
Yeah.
But we cannot forget the human side of the work. And I'm glad we have an employer, but I'm sorry, I'm an employer.
Yeah.
Higher ed is an employer.
Yeah.
Huge employer. And because of what happened during COVID, and a new partnership I have with private oil companies, the 5 tribal colleges in North Dakota are launching an apprenticeship initiative wherein we are tying higher ed, tribal community colleges, and apprenticeships, which is over here, this labor thing, okay, but higher ed, we have what? Internships, work study, but more importantly, and I don't think it's just my little college in Fort Talent, North Dakota, I need faculty. I need Dakota faculty. I have nobody in the pipeline, nobody. I have 24 faculty at my little college. The majority of them are non-native. I have 3 or 4 natives. Excellent teachers, really, really good at what they do. And my student-faculty ratio is 8-to-1. A lot of intimacy. So you have this thing called relationships, relationship building. And I think part of what our panel is about is how do we meld this? I do believe it's being done. I like that higher ed, that myself as a tribal community college, but I think also many colleges are doing this. We're reaching out and partnering in different ways relative to workforce development. And what is it? I also, because I'm a president of college, yes, I have to have terminal degrees, particularly for my community. Spirit Lake, Dakota. I need nurses, I need doctors, I need researchers, I need people who know how to build roads, all of that. But I do need student services personnel. We need social workers, all of that. And so as we launch this apprenticeship initiative, we're really looking at, again, as a higher ed institution, and then apprenticeships and labor, those stackable things. I'm starting with early childhood education and social work, my first 2 programs, because I run my tribe's Head Start program. I don't have qualified Head Start teachers. And I know this is just not reflective of a tribal community. This is rural America. This is inner city. This is America, and these gaps. And so how do we figure out the bridging better? There are wonderful models. There are wonderful examples out there that need to be reinforced. And my last point, I'm sorry, college should be free. And if it's just going to be the first 2 years, let's do it. I'm doing it now because I have COVID relief funding. My numbers are skyrocketing at my little college. Persistence, retention, completion, enrollment. It's because my little community in Benson County, North Dakota, doubled the poverty rate. In double poverty, they don't have to worry about how it's paid for. Childcare, transportation, gift cards for groceries, food, all of that, the basic things. And we're also documenting their academic success is skyrocketing. My president's list and dean's list, my numbers are off the chart. So it's money talks. So I'm like, show me the money. And my COVID money is almost gone. What am I going to do when it's all? And I'm looking at how do I keep my college to be tuition fees free after this. I figure I've got about another year. So policymakers need to hear this.
By the way, I want to agree with that argument. There are too many today, and you think of it this way, even if you took it in aggregate, you have a 40% error rate, meaning 40% of those that go into it don't complete. So if you make something that's free to get that kind of waste, that's a very expensive proposition. And so the other reason I wouldn't argue for free is that the benefits of education disproportionately accrue to the individual. Even if that individual gives back to the economy, and it doesn't operate like a true public good in the sense of defense operates. And so I think we have to be really careful about how we fund education. One is it's not working for everyone. It's definitely not working for those who are coming from the underrepresented, underserved backgrounds. That would be a really expensive program. Second, you'd certainly sit there and go well, it's not really public good in the sense that it's non-excludable and non-rivalrous the same way defense is. And so I certainly wouldn't think that free doesn't solve your access problems, it doesn't solve your flexibility problems, it doesn't solve a lot of the personalization that you need, et cetera. It will solve one problem, and even if you make it free, it doesn't mean all the individuals who need it come. So, and there's more than just free.
I wanted to wrap up by posing a question to you that I heard on a panel about race-conscious admissions. And the point was that higher ed has not done a great job at telling its story. And I think you could probably hear a thread throughout this conversation is that the public isn't aware of all these things. We need to demystify. We need more transparency. And so I'll ask this of all of you. How can higher ed better tell its story? So Evelyn, let's start with you. How can colleges better talk to employers about what they're good at?
Just bringing us to the table, honestly, because I've had to be the one to go to them. And it's just me and a lot of schools, so just bring us to the table and saying, okay, this is what I have. What do you need? How can I help you? How can you help me? Because that's one of the things I've paid for faculty. They're not my employees, because I've been asked that. I've been asked, well, can you ask some of your employees to teach for us? Well, no, because we're short. But this is what I can do. I can fund a position if you allow my employees to have priority into getting into that particular course. So that's some of the things that we can do, And it's not just higher education either. It's also, we also are moving down high school and middle school because it starts there. By the time that they're in college, they kind of know more or less what they want. So I went to the HOSA program in our schools. We were taking hundreds of HOSA students every year, and all they did was come and stand and watch. And I'm like, why are they not doing stuff, And they said, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, listen, I went to a high school, New Britain High, which is, in the middle of Connecticut. And when I was in high school, I actually became a certified nursing assistant in high school. So when I got out and I went to University of Connecticut, I was able to work every summer as a CNA to help, pay for my school. So I said to them, if you want to come to Memorial to have your students, you're going to have to do something. So they implemented EKG monitoring, nursing assistant, emergency medical response. They've implemented all these things so that way when the student is out of high school, they can come work for me. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to start just, at every single level, partnering. But don't wait for us to come to you. We really have to stop that.
Please, folks, chime in.
Yeah. I was just building on that. I would say, start the employer partnerships from the very beginning, right? Don't wait until senior year, the second semester of senior year when, students finally decide to go to the career services office, right? How do you build those kind of lasting partnerships that can really result in a thorough feedback loop, right? So you can be hearing, what are the changing skill needs that employers are looking for? I think it's also on skills, we hear so much in workforce circles about kind of the move to a skills-based ecosystem or a skills, first hiring system. So I think higher ed can really be starting to tell its story differently by helping students articulate what skills are they coming out with, right? So sort of not diluting the degrees at all, but really start to put it in the context of skills and how to kind of help them speak the language that employers are looking for.
I think context is the other thing. And again, for me, because I'm coming from a reservation-based community, and the employers on the reservation are typically government, federal government, BIA, who we hate, Indian Health Service, who questionable. But then there's tribal government, there's state government, there's local government and that. And so getting to the table with those who are within your community, and then setting that up. I think higher ed could do a better job of being the leader for those kinds of relationships and relationship building, because it has to be, where are your students going? My students want to stay home. My students want to help their tribe, our community. And most of them do. Most of them do come back. You know, that we don't have enough of them, unfortunately, in that. But so context is always important. You know, what's your community? What's your environment? And then what are the skills? And then also, when you, especially on the apprenticeship side, so North Dakota, you know, has that oil boom. That's 4 hours away from me on the western part of North Dakota. So you think of apprenticeships and you think of oil, you know, or carpentry, you know, the mainstream ones. But again, I'm starting my apprenticeship program, social work and early childhood education, professional pathways, because those are what I need to run those programs for my tribal community. So just thinking outside the box, but always within the context of our environments.
Scott, any closing thoughts on your final?
I think you've hit a lot of them already. I would say that simply that we have to recast the measures of quality in higher education. I would just echo what Maria and Evelyn were saying. It was like individuals have to know it's going to be relevant to the opportunity they're pursuing. How is it going to get me from where I am to where I want to be? Second, they have to actually understand that, in fact, you're endeavoring to make it a really high probability that I'm going to be successful. You know, starting today, the odds are not in my favor. You know, they need to be increasingly in the favor of the individual. And so how are you as an institution demonstrating that you're personalizing that journey, that you have a high probability of success? Third is I do think it has to be low cost. We have to stop figuring out ways to finance an ever-increasing cost, and we have to figure out ways to fundamentally bend the arc of the cost curve, because there's evidence that shows that even just the sticker price cost of attending education today is decreasing the probability that individuals will pursue it because they simply just don't believe it's affordable anymore. It's just too high of a cost. And until we start showing that we can bend the arc of the cost curve, you're going to have fewer and fewer people participating in it. They're going to find other ways to acquire the skills they need to change their lives for the better.
Well, happy note to end on, but thank you. Please thank our panelists. I know